I'm just gonna say it, Yuan, Nicole, and Astra might just be the best team in the game. And I don't say that lightly. At the very least, they're on par with Miyabi's best teams, which is honestly the most surprising part. Now at this point you might think I'm trolling, because everyone knows that Yuan is a burst DPS who needs a stunner in her team. Alright? Or does she? Before we get into the video, I do want to say that none of this gameplay is super optimized. I tried my best to not waste any shot shells or overcap, but there were definitely instances where I did. Someone with a keen knowledge of Yuan could probably further optimize stun windows, but these combos and rotations seem to work incredibly well based on my testing. I also have a fairly well invested Yuan, which may have played a small part in the results, however the glow up just from Astra is insane. I've been seeing this team recommended and trialed on Reddit. At first I was skeptical too, but the reality is Astra and Nicole just giga buff Yuan so much that this team actually feels incredibly strong. It can take a while to get going since you won't have access to any bonus shot shells from the extra chain attacks with Astra's ult or Yuan's C1 if you have it. Once you get going though, this team feels incredibly fluid and strong to play. For sheer defense, I was killing Thanatos well before the stun came in. In this mode, I completely ignored trying to build days and just focused on trying to get my ult as fast as possible and just unloading shot shells as much as I could. This run was my best at 45 seconds, despite the mistakes and lack of optimizing. Deadly Assault played out a little differently. The machine was pretty easy to stun and I managed to squeeze 3 stun windows in with relative consistency, provided that I parried as much as possible. Impairing the legs definitely helped a lot too, completely making up for the lack of a stunner in this fight. When I ran with Anby previously, I only got 28k and found that I was often stunning too fast, meaning my ult was on cooldown whenever the stun came up. This was despite my hybrid playstyle with Yuan, bringing her on field and unloading some extra shot shells whenever Nicole had extra energy. This team was a little late with first stun, but after that I usually found myself with all 3 ults during a stun window. This was definitely where I noticed my shot shell management was the worst, but that probably helps make up for the fact that I have C1. I found out later that I don't need to put Yuan after Nicole to activate Nicole's quick assist into Yuan, which probably could have given me triple chain attacks for Yuan after Astra's ult. For anyone without C1, you definitely want to prioritize the extra shot shells, since Nicole never felt like she had an energy issue at all unless I was failing to get in a defensive assist. If that was the case, I'd really only find myself running out of resources when I was close to the next stun window anyway, so it wasn't really an issue. Even though this team's strength did come as a surprise to me, it really shouldn't. I made a video a while back comparing C1 Chingy to Caesar, and the results were pretty comparable. Of course, this was before the ult and decibel changes that have buffed Chingy, but haven't really moved the needle for Caesar. However, the experiment did prove that Yuan can definitely be used in a more on-field role. Even in this team, Yuan spends a lot of time swapping with Nicole whenever her buff is up, and she almost always has the energy to recast it, so that never felt like an issue either. One more thing to note is that I was able to put my Nicole on a damage focused build with 4-set chaotic metal. It isn't fully optimized, but I compared it with 4-set swing jazz and the results were pretty similar. If anything, DPS Nicole performed better. I would aim for a bit more crit rate here if you can, but an 81-90 crit ratio in combat is pretty good. You might be able to swap the 2-set to something that contributes a bit more damage if you aren't having energy issues, since Nicole is on field a little more. Personally, I didn't try this, but it could definitely work if you're getting in a lot of defensive assists. Overall though, you definitely need a lot of crit rate to make this build work. I would stick to anomaly proficiency and 4-set swing jazz if you don't have at least 70 to 80% crit rate in combat. Speaking of builds, for those of you who like looking at the numbers, Jingy's stun damage multiplier works out to be a 53% final damage buff during stun windows. Astra on the other hand gives my Yuan 62% final damage at all times. For context, Nicole contributes about 60% final damage to Yuan, not accounting for her either anomaly application for consistent 4-set chaotic metal uptime. Yeah, this team's kinda broken. If you made it this far, yeah, you know what I'm about to say. Please like and subscribe, blah blah blah. But seriously, I want to keep making Zenless content for you guys, and it really means the world when you show your support by liking and subscribing, so please. Anyway, this team is pretty good, and it seems like Yuan doesn't really need a stunner after all. I would say this is her best team right now, although it's probably worth talking about their strengths and weaknesses. Even though I primarily tested against either weak opponents, I did also test against some neutral matchups and found pretty good success there too, managing to match my best time with a Miyabi triple anomaly team. If anything, the rotation lined up perfectly for me to have a second ult up by the time the stun hit. However, just like the second half, you really don't need the stun window to end the fight and do your damage. As the endgame content gets harder, it's likely that we may need that second burst to end a fight. Having it line up perfectly with the stun window is even better. Speaking of the stun window, this team isn't reliant on stun windows to do good damage. You can get by just fine by ulting off cooldown, similarly to anomaly teams. With Astra on the team, you are able to access chain attacks without stunning, giving you extra shot shells and more damage. However, chain attacks restore decibels and shot shells, meaning the less natural stun windows you have, the more impactful Yuan Cinema 1 will feel. This team really makes full use out of Chaotic Metal's 4-set crit damage buff. With 3 of the units on the team, and especially Nicole with her high anomaly output, Corruption is pretty consistently applied at all times, allowing both Yuan and Nicole, if you so choose, to benefit from this insane buff. This one's kind of a neutral point, but this team plays a bit like a double anomaly team without the disorder. Astra is your support, Yuan is your main damage dealer, and Nicole is your sub DPS. If you don't like managing multiple characters outside of stun windows, you might struggle with this team. However, it definitely feels more fun and rewarding to play than the Chingy teams in my opinion. Chingy is a very simple on-field stunner, and I personally don't like her spam clicking playstyle. If you're in the same boat, I would definitely try out this team. On that note, I think Astra is a much more universal pull than Chingy. Due to her extended field time, Chingy can sometimes clash with certain DPSs, despite her universal stun damage multiplier buff. On the other hand, Astra is a genuinely universal support, being able to play into either attack or anomaly teams and provide a universal attack buff, as well as providing extra chain attacks, a little healing, and some damage and crit damage. If you're concerned about pull efficiency, Astra is the better choice overall. However, this team isn't without its weaknesses. Not having a stunner does reduce your burst damage slightly, while also increasing your field time on Yuan. Unlike Miyabi and Yanagi, Yuan has a more active on-field playstyle since she doesn't have as many iframes or any inbuilt parries. This isn't necessarily a detriment since dodge counters do generate a shot shell, while defensive assists also help with Nicole's energy needs. However, it isn't as comfortable to play as other teams from a safety standpoint. Of course, as I mentioned before, since you don't have a stunner, your days build-up will be lower than Yuan's teams with a stunner, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing, it's just something to be aware of. You don't need 7 copies of Nicole, but it does really help Yuan's build and also increases Nicole's personal damage to have a 15% crit rate buff at C6. At the very least, you'll probably want Cinema 2 for the extra energy, alongside Cinema 1's duration extension for EX special when you hold down the button. And again, even though you don't need Yuan's C1, it is a considerable DPS upgrade, since you often end up unloading all of your shells anyway. Getting triple chain attacks through Astra's ult would give you even more ammo, so it might be worth figuring out the best way to utilize that. In this test though, I didn't want to abuse my C1, so I simply Astra ulted immediately after the natural chain attacks ended. So there you have it, the first Mono Eater team. Personally, this is one of my favorite teams in the game. It definitely feels like it can keep up with Miyabi in a way I didn't expect. In terms of future upgrades, I could see Nicole being traded for a sub DPS or stunner with considerable buffs, but it would take a lot to outdo what Nicole does for Yuan in this team. Have you tried this team yet? Let me know in the comments down below how it went. Please like and sub, okay, I'll see you later.